Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We're gonna get up close and personal with your beliefs.
Oh, getting philosophical.
Yeah, exactly. But not just like what you believe, but the why. Why you think what you think. Like, what are the hidden forces that make you, well, you?
I like that. It's like we often just accept our beliefs as just there without really examining where they came from. But there's a whole story behind them.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's like almost an archaeological dig, but for your mind.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Well, our source material today is a fascinating excerpt from a text all about how, get this, our circumstances affect what philosophies we end up adopting.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we're going to use it to explore how, like, everything from, I don't know, where you grew up to even your job can sort of subtly steer you towards certain ways of thinking.
Okay, yeah. There's definitely a lot to unpack there.
Right. It's almost like everyone has this unique philosophical fingerprint based on their own life experiences.
I like that analogy, a philosophical fingerprint.
Right. So first up, let's talk about personal experiences, because, none of us get through life unscathed. Our source material points out that going through something really tough, like maybe a major loss or, some kind of trauma, could make someone more likely to lean towards, say, existentialism.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if you think about what existentialism is really about. It's not about being all doom and gloom, but more about accepting that, well, the universe doesn't come with a prepackaged meaning.
Right, right.
So then it becomes about creating your own meaning.
I see. So someone who's going through a lot of suffering might find comfort in that idea of taking control and finding purpose through their actions, in spite of all the chaos.
Exactly. It's like saying, okay, the world might be kind of crazy, but I can still choose what my life stands for.
Powerful stuff. But okay, what about someone who's had a pretty like stable and happy life? They might be drawn to something else, right? Like maybe humanism.
You got it. Humanism focuses on like our potential for growth and happiness right here, right
Yeah,
now. It's all about being rational, compassionate, stuff like that.
makes sense.
Which, it aligns with a worldview that's been shaped by, generally positive experiences.
Yeah, like our brains are almost like wired to say yes to philosophies that just fit with what we've lived?
Yeah, like our experiences kind of set the stage, often without us realizing it.
I get that. Like I know for me, after going through a period with a lot of big changes, I found myself reading more and more about Stoicism.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It really shows you how our individual stories intersect with these broader philosophical currents.
Absolutely. But okay, it's not just our stories, right? History, like big historical events, those play a huge role too.
Oh, for sure. History's full of these turning points that have, shaped entire philosophical movements.
Right. Like, think about it. Our source material says that during times of massive upheaval, like wars or major crises, you often see a surge in ideologies that are all about promising like order and stability,
Absolutely.
like strong nationalism or even sometimes authoritarianism. It's like people crave certainty when everything else feels like it's falling apart?
Yeah, it's almost like a collective trauma response.
Hmm.
A powerful example of this is, well, the rise of fascism in Europe after World War I. I mean, these societies were just devastated by the war, and they were really vulnerable to, well, these promises of strength and national revival.
Right, even if those promises came at the cost of individual liberties.
Exactly.
So, okay, history can get pretty dark, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? What about those periods of incredible scientific progress? Do those shake things up on a like philosophical level?
Oh, absolutely. They bring about a totally different kind of shift. Take the Enlightenment, for example. It was this era of, just incredible intellectual growth fueled by scientific discoveries like, Newton's laws of motion. And you see this rise of rationalism where logic and evidence became the like gold standard for determining what was true.
So it's like even our understanding of like truth itself is influenced by these big historical swings.
Yeah, for sure. Like our concept of truth is constantly being redefined as our collective knowledge grows.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got external forces, but it's not just that, right? I mean, our own internal wiring, our psychological needs, those play a big role too.
Oh, completely. We all have these fundamental needs.
Exactly. Like we crave certainty, a sense of control over our lives. And for some people, that's where something like stoicism comes in.
Yeah, it's not just about like enduring hardship. It's about finding peace by focusing on what you can control,
Mm.
your own thoughts and actions. It's very much a philosophy for navigating uncertainty, which, let's face it, is something we all deal with.
For sure. It's like saying, okay, I can't control the whole world, but I can control how I respond to it.
Right.
Then you have people who are wired for something else. Freedom. They need to like make their own choices, blaze their own trail. And for them, a philosophy like existentialism or libertarianism might be a better fit, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Those philosophies really emphasize self-reliance and autonomy. It's all about the individual's right to define their own meaning and make choices free from outside pressure.
So, okay, we've got these internal needs pushing us towards certain ideas, but then there's this other factor that I think a lot of people don't want to talk about, but it's kind of a big deal. Money.
Ah, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Our source material actually highlights how, a person's economic reality can play a huge role in what philosophies they find appealing. Like, think about it. If you're struggling with poverty or inequality, you might be more open to philosophies like, say, Marxism,
Right.
which, it focuses on social justice and, redistributing wealth.
And addressing those systemic issues that cause inequality in the first place.
Exactly. It's like saying, hey, this system clearly isn't working for everyone, so maybe it's time to rethink the whole thing.
It's about recognizing that the playing field isn't level for everyone.
Right. But then, okay, flip the script. Imagine you're someone who's born into privilege and wealth.
Yeah, the perspective shifts, doesn't it?
Totally. Suddenly, those ideas about individual responsibility and limited government intervention, like the kind of stuff you see in libertarianism, might start to sound pretty good.
A good example of that is Ayn Rand's objectivism. It's all about individual achievement and laissez-faire capitalism.
Mhm.
And it's super popular among like entrepreneurs and folks who believe that their success is, well, mainly due to their own hard work.
It's incredible how our lived experiences, whether it's hardship or abundance, can really make certain philosophical ideas click.
For sure. It's almost like our minds are trying to make sense of the world based on what we've personally experienced.
Totally. But wait, there's more. It's not just about our own personal bubble, right? Our social environment, the culture we're raised in, that plays a big role too.
Absolutely. Cultures that prioritize community and harmony often, well, they tend to gravitate towards philosophies that reflect those values.
Okay, so like what? Give us an example.
Well, like Confucianism, for instance. It's huge in many East Asian cultures,
Hmm.
and it emphasizes things like respect for elders, social harmony, and fulfilling your role within the community.
So it's kind of like a blueprint for living in a way that prioritizes the good of the group over, individual desires.
Right.
But then you have societies that are all about individualism, like, a lot of Western countries.
Yeah, and there you see more emphasis on things like existentialism or humanism.
It's fascinating how the like cultural air we breathe can really affect which philosophical ideas take root.
It's almost like our social context is silently shaping our beliefs without us even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like this invisible force field of ideas.
Right. And it makes you wonder how much of what we believe is actually our own and how much is shaped by the world around us.
Right. Like, are we really in control of our own thoughts, or are we just products of our environments?
Deep stuff, huh?
It is. But okay, before we spiral too far down the rabbit hole, let's take a break and come back to this in part two. We'll explore even more fascinating factors that influence our philosophies. Don't go anywhere.
We'll be right back.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already. Personal experiences, history, money, culture. It's like this giant recipe for our beliefs.
It really is. And there are even more ingredients to consider.
Oh, there's more. Okay, hit me.
Well, think about religion. That's a huge influence for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Growing up in a certain religious environment can have a profound impact on your philosophical outlook.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like someone raised in say, a Catholic household might naturally gravitate towards, I don't know, maybe Thomistic philosophy.
Exactly. It's all about harmonizing faith with reason. It's
Yeah.
like having this built-in framework for understanding the world.
So it's like you're starting off with a certain set of philosophical building blocks.
Exactly. But then what about people who, weren't raised in a religious environment? Do they gravitate towards certain philosophies too?
That's a good question. What do you think?
Well, I think often you see a lot of humanism or materialism in those cases, philosophies that focus on like human values and the tangible world rather than, supernatural explanations.
So it's like our early exposure to faith, or the lack of it, really lays the groundwork for how we approach those big existential questions.
It's a foundation for sure.
Right. Okay, but here's something else that's super interesting. Our source material talks about how even your job can influence your philosophical leanings.
Really? Okay, now that's fascinating.
I know, right? It seems wild, but think about it. Like creative types, artists, writers, musicians, they're often drawn to philosophies that emphasize individuality and, searching for meaning, like romanticism or existentialism.
It makes you wonder if it's the profession itself that draws them to those philosophies, or if
Right.
it's the other way around. Maybe people who are already inclined towards those ways of thinking are naturally drawn to creative fields.
It's like a chicken or the egg situation.
Totally. Like, take the romantic poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley. His work was so full of, passion and a rejection of societal norms, all these themes you see in romantic thought.
It's like their art is a way of like living their philosophy.
Exactly. But then, okay, contrast that with someone in a more analytical field like a scientist or an engineer. Their world is all about logic, data.
Mm.
It makes sense that they might be drawn to philosophies like empiricism, where knowledge comes from observation and experimentation.
Oh, absolutely. Someone like Francis Bacon, right? He's basically the father of the scientific method. And his whole philosophy was about like rigorous observation and experimentation.
Exactly. And that shaped the way we approach science even today.
Okay, so hold on. We've got our personal experiences, history, economic realities, the culture we live in, our religious upbringing, A&D, our professions, all playing a role in what we believe.
Yep, it's a pretty wild mix.
It is. But I think there's one final piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. Our upbringing, specifically the political and social climate we're raised in.
Yeah, that's huge. Like, if you grow up in a place where, conformity is really valued and speaking out is dangerous, that's going to shape your worldview in a major way.
For sure. Like our source material actually points out that in those kinds of authoritarian environments, people often end up accepting philosophies that, well, justify strong leadership and prioritize order over individual freedom.
Right, because in that context, it's a way of like making sense of a world where, those in power have absolute authority.
It's almost like a survival mechanism, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. But then contrast that with someone who's raised in a democracy. They're surrounded by ideas of individual rights, freedom of speech, tolerance.
Yeah.
Those values become ingrained.
And that can make them more open to philosophies like, what was it, liberalism?
Yeah. And pluralism. Think about the Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke. Their ideas about natural rights and limited government really paved the way for modern democratic principles.
So it's like the political and social air we breathe really does shape our understanding of, well, of everything.
It's a powerful influence, for sure. And it makes you wonder how much of what we believe is actually a product of our own thinking and how much is just absorbed from the world around us.
Right. Like at what point are we truly free thinkers and at what point are we just, products of our environment?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's one that our listeners should ponder as we head into the final part of our deep dive today.
So stay tuned for more philosophical adventures.
All right, so spill the beans. What's this big question we got to think about?
Well, think about everything we've talked about today, all those different factors. Now ask yourself, which ones have had the biggest impact on your personal philosophy?
Oh, wow. It's like we're being asked to turn the lens inward.
Exactly. Because once you start to understand those influences, it can really change how you see yourself and, well, how you see the world around you.
It's like we've been handed these like philosophical X-ray glasses. We can
Yeah.
suddenly see all those hidden forces that have shaped our beliefs, all those historical threads, personal experiences, even those economic realities we talked about.
And it's not about, like, judging your philosophy or trying to find the right one.
Mhm.
It's more about recognizing that our beliefs are, complex, they change over time, and they're influenced by a whole bunch of things.
Right, right.
And that realization can make us more open-minded, more compassionate, more understanding of people who see things differently.
It's like a call for like intellectual humility or something, right?
Exactly. It's recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn from other people, from other perspectives.
I love that. So, okay, where do we go from here? Like, how do we actually use this knowledge to, grow and have better conversations with people who might disagree with us?
Well, I think it starts with curiosity. Don't just surround yourself with people who already agree with you.
Mhm.
Seek out different perspectives, read things that challenge your assumptions, and be willing to have those tough conversations with people who think differently.
Oh, yeah. Those conversations can be tough, but I mean, they're also super important, right? Especially these days.
Absolutely. And when you do have those conversations, approach them with humility and a genuine desire to understand where the other person is coming from. Don't just try to win the argument.
It's about like building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. which is something we could all use a little more of these days, don't you think?
100%. Okay, so to wrap things up, it sounds like the big takeaway here is that, well, our philosophies aren't just these random things we come up with in a vacuum. They're shaped by this amazing mix of experiences, historical events, cultural influences, all this stuff.
And the more we understand those influences, the more we understand ourselves, and the better equipped we are to navigate a world full of, well, different ideas and perspectives.
Well said. So, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this incredible
It
journey.
was my pleasure. And remember, listeners, keep those mind curious.
And until next time, keep diving deep.